Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome all to Free Thinking Ministries YouTube. We are so glad to have you here. We are going to hit the ground running today. Is the Pope right, or is JD Vance? Is JD Vance right about the Ordo Amoris? If you don't know what that means, order of charity or orders of love as applied to maybe some government things, maybe personal things. This has been making the rounds. The Pope, yes, the Pope Francis, came out with a statement yesterday on this. So we're going to cover it here today. I am Josh Klein, your host. I am joined by Thomas Mahler. Is it Mahler? It's Mahler, right?
It's Mueller.
Mahler. Dang it. Like a Mahler.
Yeah, like your tooth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. My apologies. Let's restart. No. Hey, it's great to be here. You were here last week with Tim while I was in Chicago. And now Tim is is he in Utah? He's on a Maven trip.
Yeah, I think in Utah.
I think it's Utah. I'm not sure. He's on a Maven trip. That's why he's not here with us today. But Thomas, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Survived the snow and all the cold weather.
Oh yeah, it's so exciting, the snow. Well, as we jump into it, first I want to thank our pals at Mead Ammo, meadammo.com. Go to meadammo.com, get some ammo for your firearms, maybe to protect yourself. Maybe you're somebody like Tim who likes to go pretend like he's a SWAT person, and we can make fun of him because he's not here. Go and make pretend like he's a SWAT person and uses ammo for a target practice, that sort of thing. Whatever it is, go to meadammo.com. They will get you hooked up. Tell them that Free Thinking Ministries sent you. Well, let's get into it. We are talking about the Ordo Amoris today. What I want to do, if this is okay with you, Thomas, I want to start with the clip that made everything go viral. And then I want to kind of walk through that clip and people's reactions to it. But I think people have kind of lost the plot in a lot of ways. So we're going to watch the clip from a Fox News interview. I think it's with Hannity, with JD Vance, when he talks about that. Is that cool with you, Thomas?
Let's do it.
All right. So here it is.
But there's this old school, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that. They seem to hate the citizens of their own country and care more about people outside their own borders. That is no way to run a society. And I think the profound difference that Donald Trump brings to the leadership of this country is the simple concept, America first. It doesn't mean you hate anybody else. It means that you have leadership. And President Trump has been very clear about this, that puts the interests of American citizens first.
Okay, so that's the clip, right? It's like less than a minute. I hope we didn't get booted off YouTube for having it full screen, and Fox is going to ding us or something like that. But that's the whole clip. What were do you remember watching this when it first came out, or is this kind of snowballed in effect, right?
Yeah, because I didn't, when I first heard about this, it wasn't through watching the clip, it was through seeing stuff on Facebook and just all the different posts about it. Then I eventually went back and watched it. But, seeing it for the first time, it's like, to be honest, I didn't necessarily find anything wrong with what he said.
Yes. It's almost like we're always constantly looking for something to be offended by, right? And because JD Vance said it, it means that it must be wrong or something like that. I don't know. I found it very inoffensive, especially, you take a look at what he said. He said, well, it doesn't mean you hate people. It doesn't mean you don't care for people, but it means you take care of your citizens first. And then this got bantied about, and then the term Ordo Amoris got thrown out there. Had you heard this term before this? I know a lot of people hadn't heard this term before this. If you haven't read Augustine, that sort of thing, had you heard this term before this?
No, I had not. I've heard of Order of Charity, but I hadn't heard the actual
the
Latin term. Yeah. So
yeah, because Latin's ridiculous. So I'm just kidding. Latin bros are going to come after me. Are there Latin bros? I don't know. comment if there are Latin bros.
Well, that's just a Latin mass Catholics, I think.
Okay,
so
there you
those are
go.
Latin bros.
Yeah. So here's the thing. If you have questions or comments about this, we do have super chats now. We figured that out last week. So we will stop everything and read your super chat. Give any sort of amount. We will stop everything, no matter what you put, as long as it is not inappropriate. And well, that's it. Just don't make it inappropriate. And then we'll just stop whatever we're doing. If you want to click on the link,
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. I just don't want, trolls to start to, but we'll take the money. We just won't. Yeah. We'll take the money. We just won't actually talk about the super chat if it's inappropriate. Okay. Yeah. All right. So obviously this was a point of much contention on the. Are you on X, Thomas?
I joined today.
You joined today. What's your handle? Let's get it out there.
It is Tom H. Moller.
Tom H. Moller. Okay. Yeah. That means I need to go follow you like as soon as possible. So Tom Moller, go follow him. Tom H. Moller. Just T-O-M, not T-H, right?
T-O-M. T-H-O-M was taken. So
okay. T-O-M H, the letter H, Moller, at Tom H. Moller. Go follow him. But so you didn't get to see the whole X Maelstrom.
No,
that came from it. All right, we're going to talk about Pope Francis on February 11th. So that was 2 days ago. Released a long statement. Did you read the whole thing or just stuff about it?
No, I did read. It was more of a skim. I think it was specifically point 6 that a lot of people were quoting that I read fully, but
yes, and that's where we're going to focus on our time today. So as we get going here, if you have thoughts on the Ordo Amoris or Order of Charity, Order of Love, however you want to put that, drop those comments below. We'll get to some comments. Again, super chats more than welcome as well. So please do that. We are going to be dissecting this. The Pope says this, and actually I might share my screen here. Here we go. I don't know if people can read that. I can barely read it. But this is, I don't know who this Massimo is, but he highlighted it very nicely for us so we can read. it. So this is point 6. So what the Pope did, for those who don't know, who are watching the live stream right now, what the Pope did was he released basically a list of statements concerning specifically the United States immigration policy. I found this extremely odd. Maybe you don't pay attention to things that the Pope does, Thomas, which is fine. But I'm trying to remember the last time I saw a statement like this from someone like the Pope. About American policy specifically? Can you recall anything?
He's the only Pope I know of that's
true.
Really done that. Well, I mean, but even looking back at some previous popes, I mean, I can't think of anyone who's done something quite as direct as this.
Yeah, so I found that strange. I found it strange that he was weighing in so heavily and going kind of gloves off with JD Vance's just line and interview. And the thing that I think makes this awkward for JD Vance in particular is that JD Vance, I believe, is Catholic.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not awkward. I can disagree. I think the Pope is wrong and that the Pope is generally more of an activist than a Pope in a lot of ways, than a pontiff in a lot of ways. So I think it makes people like Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, it makes them bristle because they're Catholic. But yeah, so here's what he says. Let's look at point 6. This is what he says. So he says, Christians know very well that it is only by affirming the infinite dignity of all that our own identity as persons and as communities reaches its maturity. Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. So this is definitely referring to JD Vance's point, right? Mm-hmm. Those concentric circles that go out. It's definitely referring to that. In other words, the human person is not a mere individual, relatively expansive with some philanthropic feelings, exclamation point. The human person is a subject with dignity who, through the constitutive relationship with all, especially with the poorest, can gradually mature in his identity and vocation. The true Ordo Amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan. Then he cites the passage. That is by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception. Okay, so that is the big key, the big takeaway from the Pope, saying that they are not concentric circles, that everyone has human dignity. What were your impressions? What are your first impressions when you think about that?
I'm going to be honest. The first statement is kind of obvious. I mean, sure, everyone has value and dignity. That seems fairly straightforward. I don't think it's that bill is necessary. But I guess I disagree that Christian love is not, whether or not you want to say it's concentric and expanding outward, is like, but there are specific people that we are supposed to love more. That would be like, I am called to love my children more, but I love someone across the world and my wife more.
Yeah. And if for people doubting that, here's a question. Here's a good exercise that I have for people. Should Thomas love my wife as much as I love my wife? And should I love Thomas's wife as much as he loves his wife? I suppose if I did, we would be having a different live stream right now. But that puts it in perspective. There's like an intuition there, right? Like if my kids are in a burning building, your kids are in a burning building, and we're both running towards our kids, right? Mm-hmm. Like, not that I don't love your kids or wouldn't sacrifice even my life for them if they were in the building. That's not the case. That's not the point. The point is that I have a responsibility of love for my kids first. So here's what I think is going on here. There's this idea that responsibility is tied to love in human relationships. But there is also a broader love that ought to be extended to the dignity of every single individual, and that ought to be relatively the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I actually spent the morning reading St. Thomas Aquinas's whole chapter on the order of love. And he talked about that exact thing where, like, there are these two different types of love. Like, yeah, we're supposed to have a general love for everyone, but when our acts of love, like acting in love, that is ordered, though.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think it's like, I think I got a quote from Thomas Aquinas pulled up on my computer. He says, "Now the order of nature is such that every natural agent pours forth its activity first and foremost of all on the things which are nearest to it. Therefore, we ought to be most beneficent towards those who are most closely connected with us." That's straight from Thomas Aquinas, so you probably read that today. And that seems to be right. I don't know how that would be wrong, but it does also seem to fly in the face of what the Pope is saying here, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's really interesting that to have him seemingly contradict to some extent one of his own saints, at least, or because now if he's implying that we have the general love towards everyone, then sure, he agrees. But to me, it seems more implying that our acts should not be in concentric circles, expanded outwards. That's what it seems to be implying to me.
Yeah. So it seems to be the case that you and I would both think that in general, the principle is a Christian principle. So I think there are two issues at play here. First, there's the principle that JD Vance talks about. And then second, there is the government aspect of applying that principle, right? So we're kind of separating those in our conversation right now. We're talking just about the principle right now. But it seems like you and I are both in agreement that the principle of what he's talking about is actually a Christian principle.
Yeah, I'd say it's found all throughout the Gospels and the different New Testament writings.
Yeah. So if we're going to say that, can we back that up? Like, that's what I wanted to say. Like, can we back that up with Scripture? Is that something that you and I can back that up with Scripture? I think we can. I think we got some pulled up that we're going to go through here, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me read one first, and then we'll kind of go through a few. If you had some pulled up, or if not, let me know if I'm stealing your thunder here. The first one I want to talk about is 1 Timothy 5:8. Now, this is Paul writing to Timothy, talking about how he ought to order his church. So we understand that this is not necessarily for civic duties, right? It's, hey, this is how believers ought to behave one to another. And there's some harsh words in here. So 1 Timothy 5:8 says this: anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That seems to fly in the face of the pontiff here. That there seems to be, in that passage, 1 Timothy 5:8, there seems to be an order of love, an activity, at least, in provision, that we as Christians ought to care for our relatives, especially our own household. And if we don't, we are basically, he's saying, you guys aren't living an authentic faith. You're not living an authentic Christian faith.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about the passage is that the verses before, it's talking about specifically widows and taking care of widows who husbands died and they don't have children. And it talks about, if they have no family, it's the church's job to help take care of them, or they need to get remarried. But if they have family, it is the family's job, not the church's, to take care of those widows.
He even puts like an age cap on hey, if widows aren't if it's not the old kind of widow, then they don't go on the list. But if it's the old kind of widow, then they do go on the list. So it's this, hey, how do we take care of the people in our midst, right? Did you have another passage you wanted to throw out there?
Well, I mean, you could just go to I just think the two greatest commandments in Matthew. See if I can get to it here. Matthew 22.
Yeah. I think we can summarize.
Yeah, I mean, that's easy to summarize. But love God and then love your neighbor as yourself. But the first greatest commandment is love God, and so that is, in a sense, in order to it, you were to first love God, and then the second is to then love your neighbor. And so that itself, I think, points to a kind of order. And then obviously your neighbor, I would think, after yourself, you would be after the neighbor. You love God, then the neighbor, then yourself.
Yes. But the same, like the love your neighbor as yourself, you ought to love each other.
Yeah.
On kind of equal footing. This is where I think JD does get something wrong in this interview, is he doesn't mention loving God first. Now, I kind of get why he doesn't do that, because he's talking about policy, and he says there's a principle, and then he says, and a very Christian principle, in my opinion. So he's not going to say love God first in that sense, but I don't think we can properly order love if we don't love God first.
Yeah. Because by loving God, I mean, that's how we get the direction then to love others.
Yes. So there's another one. So for me, like Galatians 6:10 says, so then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. So again, this is kind of like the who are your neighbors. We'll get to the Good Samaritan soon. Don't worry. We'll get to the hard things soon, if you're wondering. So there's this, should we care for people? Absolutely. Should we love all people? Absolutely. Should we do good to all people? Absolutely. But the Apostle Paul in Galatians says, but especially to those in the faith, to the brotherhood of believers. And this goes straight to when Jesus says, a new command I give you, that you love each other as I have loved you. So you must love one another, which means we have to exhibit the love in the church so that people look at us and go, there's something different about that community, right?
Yeah.
So that shows that there's even a hierarchy, and people might even call that discriminatory, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you've never worked at a church, right? You've
No.
yeah. So when I first got into ministry, probably how old are you? You're
24.
24. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was 21 and I got into ministry, and I was very idealistic. And there'd be people that would come and like knock on our church door, because we're kind of like inner city area in Omaha, and they'd knock on our church door and they would ask for cash. If you give me cash, I'm really down, and we had to turn them away. And I remember being frustrated because I wanted to help all these people, but our policy was, first we take care of the people in our local congregation. We have funds for them. And I remember thinking, but it doesn't show the love of Christ. But this is exactly what Paul's talking about in this passage, right? Like, especially those who are of the household of faith. That doesn't mean you don't do good ever outside of that. It doesn't mean that sometimes when a person shows up to the church, I don't personally go, you know what, today I'm driving with you to give you a tank of gas. That's fine, because I have an opportunity to share the gospel, which is what we did. We did that sometimes. But our attention first went to the body of believers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it, and also I think shows that if you can take care of those closest to you, then you might actually have the capacity to then take care of others around you. This isn't exactly tied to it, but I think of the requirements for overseers. It's like, they had to take care of the family first, in the sense of like an ordered family. They couldn't have they had to be taking care of the kids had to be well behaved and all that sort of stuff, because they can't even be the head of their own family. How could they be the head of the church? And so if we can't even take care of ourselves, and love ourselves, how can we possibly go out and love others? If the church couldn't love fellow believers, how could we then go out and, as a church body, and properly love non-believers?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So then you might have somebody say, they might come and bring other texts, other passages where they go, well, this flies in the face of that. So you might have atheists that come and say, see, this is what I'm talking about with you Christians. It's all inconsistent, because here are some passages that fly directly in the face of what you're saying about the order of love. Or you might have some progressive Christians say, well, actually, we should look at the tale of the Good Samaritan, which is what we'll do. Don't worry, we'll get there. You got to hang out. You got to hang out for the Good Samaritan portion. We'll get there, because I think we'll dismantle the Pope's view of the Good Samaritan. And suffice it to say this: I'm glad I'm not Catholic, because I can speak in opposition of the Pope on equal footing, in my opinion, in this scenario. But there are other passages that people will bring up, that I have seen people bring up. The first one is Matthew 12:49-50. They said, they're telling Jesus that his mother and his brothers want to see him. And so here's an interesting, maybe the Pope wouldn't want to talk about this, because Jesus is admitting to having biological brothers in this passage. Okay, that was a cheap shot. Okay, I'm sorry, Catholic friends, if you're watching, I'm sorry. That was bad. Maybe we'll talk about the perpetual virginity of Mary at some point or another. So this is Matthew 12:49-50. They want Jesus's brothers and his mother want his attention. And Jesus says, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand towards his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." So here they would say, well, Jesus is saying that, as long as we're disciples, we're all in the same family, and there is no order to it. That Jesus is actually dismantling that idea. What is actually going on here, and what Jesus is doing? Do you have any thoughts there, Thomas? I feel like I'm filibustering, and I don't mean to.
Well, I think just what's going on here is that let's see, they essentially thought that he was crazy, and they were like, what are you doing, Jesus? Like stop saying you're the Messiah, whatever. And I think the point here more is that, so whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother, sister, and mother. It's more so about, again, the first order. You have the first order of love towards God. And so that has to be the main priority. And then, so if you have family members, and this will probably get to another verse that we'll later talk about dividing families, where the first order is God, and that's who your love is ordered to. So that means if you have family members who are essentially, atheists disagreeing with you, and not that you don't love them, but your first allegiance is to God, not to your family.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's also one of those things where Jesus is making a specific point. He's saying he's including in his family the brotherhood of the believers, but he obviously takes care of his mother and cares about his mother deeply. She's the only person on the cross that he actually takes care of, making sure that she's going to be taken care of. You know, when he says, "Hey, John, here's your mother. Mary, here's your son. Like, you're going to be taken care of. Don't worry about it." He does that. So clearly, he still had a love for his mother that was probably different than other women in and around his sphere. But I think the point to what you're saying is exactly the point. He's driving a point home, saying, hey, what really connects us, what really binds us, is our fidelity to our Heavenly Father. It's not flesh and blood. And I've said this before when I've taught kids. I've said, you have to remember as a Christian that you actually have more in common with the Chinese Christian who lives in China than you do with your atheist neighbor. You actually have more in common, because you're actually both submitting to the will of the Father through the sacrifice of Jesus the Son, and you believe in Jesus as your Lord. And so because of that, I think that's what Jesus is talking about here, just like you said. But Thomas, but what about Luke 14:26? Because this is when Jesus says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. So wouldn't JD Vance be violating this very important commandment by saying we should love our children first and then concentric circles going out? Shouldn't we actually, maybe possibly the progressives have it right when he says hate your own people and move outwards? What about this passage?
Well, again, I think Jesus is making a very specific point here. It's not about showing love and charity to your family and those around you. It's specifically about your allegiance to Christ, I think. And just that, the point being that your family should not be taking you away from Christ. Your friends should not be taking you away from Christ. It's like Christ is who your allegiance is with. And that allegiance will split your family.
Yeah, I think it's a comparative relationship here. Where Jesus is saying, hey, there is an order, and unless you're willing to give up yourself and everyone else, you're not going to be able to follow me. Like, unless your allegiance to me would look like hate to someone else, then you're not going to follow me. Obviously he's not saying you should desire to murder your father and mother. And we know this because what does Jesus say about hate in the Sermon on the Mount? I tell you the truth, anyone who hates their brother in their heart has committed murder, right? So clearly Jesus isn't going to be contradicting himself in this passage. He's not saying you ought to desire harm on your father and mother, on your sisters, and on your wife and children and brothers and sisters. He's not saying you should go kill yourself. It says even their own life. Because in verse 27, he says, whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. He's saying count the cost, that you might lose all of the people. And so you have to count the cost to that. So again, it's the first order, and it's the order that JD missed, right? It's the order that he didn't speak to. So that's the one that correctly orders all the other orders. Because I think if we don't have the order of love God first, and then we have that concentric circles, idea, I do think it can get off kilter. We can become a kind of kinist or racist in a certain sense, where we start to care only for our own and neglect other people. And I think that's what the pushback is, right? Like, people assume that that's what JD Vance means is, well, then we shouldn't care for other people.
Yeah, and and again with this, it's like, yeah, like I said, he's not talking about hating other. The point of this idea of the order of charity, it's not about hating the people who are outside your concentric circle. It's not about hating them. It's about you love someone more, though. Like with this passage, you should love God more than you love your mother and father. You should love God more than you love your brother and sister. And so, like, I should just like I should love God more than I even love my own family. But I should love my own family more than I love the person who lives next to me.
Yes, and you should love your wife more than you love my wife.
Yes.
It's just that's the way it is. But if your wife said, "Hey, I'm done with this Christian thing. You need to renounce your faith, or I'm going to leave you," like, your allegiance then isn't to her, right? It's to say, "Do what you must. My allegiance is to my King. My allegiance is to Jesus," and that would look hateful to people. Right? Like I think people would say, well, why do you hate your wife? Wouldn't you just okay, we'll stop going to church. We'll stop doing our Bible. I'll love you by sacrificing my relationship with Jesus for you because I love you so much. That would look loving to people. But when you say, no, actually, I'm not sacrificing this part of my life for you. I'm not going to divorce you. I'm not going to pursue that. But if you want to abandon me, I can't stop you. That would look kind of like hate to the outsider, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're getting to. Okay, so here's the big one, and this is the one that the Pope cites. He cites the tale of the Good Samaritan. We all know the tale of the Good Samaritan, and we all know that people use it for various political ends, and we get that. But it does teach us something about what it means to be a neighbor.
Yeah.
So in Luke chapter 10, Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. So he says, the order of love, like you said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, you've answered correctly, do this and you will live. And I think this is an important aspect to the parable. Verse 29. But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And that's what starts the story of the Good Samaritan. Right?
Yeah.
So again, for people watching, we're talking about the principle here. We'll get into the politics in a little bit. Don't worry. We'll get into that in a little bit. So then the question becomes, okay, who is your neighbor? So then he tells the story of a man going down to Jericho. He's attacked. There's a priest that, we know the story. There's a priest that leaves. There's a Levite that doesn't stop. But then there's a Samaritan that came and took pity on him, bandaged him, bandaged his wounds, took him on his own donkey and took him to an inn and took care of him. And then he pays the innkeeper, and then he says, I'll reimburse any expense you may have, and he leaves. And I want to rehash those parts because I think they're particularly important. So he takes care of him. Now, the shocking thing, obviously, is that this is a Samaritan. This is a person that would have had ill repute. The Jewish people had a visceral reaction to them, in a racist reaction in some sense to them, to say these people are half-breeds. They don't worship the way we do. They're not worthy of being put on the same plane as we are. And Jesus takes the holiest of the Jewish people and says they ignore the man in the ditch, and then takes the example that most people would use to say they're on the outside and says this man cares for the people in the ditch, for the person in the ditch, and says, then who was the neighbor in the story? And the expert in the law replies, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Jesus telling an expert in the law to go and be like a Samaritan in a story is just amazing. Go be like the Samaritan I told a story about, right? So all of that to say, does this story upset the idea of this orders of love, or does it not?
You know, though the Pope thinks, I guess, otherwise,
Yeah.
I don't see that it does. You know, I mean, you actually have two examples of, right, because you have a couple examples of someone not following the order of love.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, because you have the Levite who didn't stop, and you saw
Yep.
the priest that didn't stop. They should have. You have
Yeah.
two great examples of people not following that order of love. And I think, again, the point of the story is that you have a Samaritan who, like you said, disliked by the Jews, who did stop and to love and to have mercy on the hurt man.
Yeah. So I think it points to that there is nobody outside of this recipient of neighborliness, of love.
Mm-hmm.
That there is not a group that can be pushed outside of these circles and say, yeah, but not them, right?
Yeah.
That is different than saying, hey, you got to take care of your children first, that sort of thing. So here's a question. Here's a hypothetical. Does this question hit the same if the man in the ditch is related to the Good Samaritan? The priest and the Levite pass by. The Good Samaritan sees the man in the ditch and goes, oh man, that's my brother. And all the Good Samaritan does is the same exact stuff in that story. Bandages him up, takes him to an inn, pays for his fees, and then leaves. Would we intuitively be like, oh yeah, he was being loving in the way that we anticipate somebody of the same family to be loving? I don't think so. I think it'd be like, what are you doing? Why are you leaving them in the inn? Like you're canceling your plans now. Like you're not continuing on your way because now your brother, your flesh and blood brother, is dead in the ditch now, or almost dead in the ditch. Obviously, that's not the story that Jesus is trying to tell. He's telling a story about the fact that there is nobody outside of the bounds of love. There's nobody outside of being the neighbor, and nobody. Mm-hmm. And this is the big one. Nobody that being a neighbor is inaccessible to. The fact that the Samaritan had the ability to fulfill loving someone, loving his neighbor as himself, showed the deficiencies in the priestly orders that said our neighbors are only the people within our own midst, are only the people that are Jewish in the temple system. Those are the only people we're going to take care of. Jesus says, no, actually, if the Samaritan in my story can be a neighbor, then you can be a neighbor to the Samaritan in my story. Mm-hmm. So I don't think, again, I think that kind of tells on itself when he only cites one passage in his response to JD Vance, and the only passage he cites is this parable of the Good Samaritan without anything else. And he says that is by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception. And this is where the Pope, smuggling in politics into this thing, addresses immigration, because his whole thing is addressing immigration.
Yeah.
Right? His whole thing is to address immigration. So he's saying, well, see, you should be welcoming the person that's on the side of the road into the fraternity of all the people, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that he's actually trying to have the Good Samaritan story do something it's not meant to do.
Yeah, I mean, and even look at the other points he made throughout his letter. Mm-hmm. It is all about trying to push immigration. He brings up the example of Jesus' family leaving Nazareth to go to Egypt for safety, and say that is now the policy that every nation should have. Like, no, not necessarily. The point of Jesus' family leaving to go to Egypt was that, well, part one, that was a prophecy that Jesus had fulfilled, mm-hmm. but then also that is not prescriptive to every other nation today.
Yeah, and Jesus and it's not like it's not like borders operated the same way
Yeah.
then as it does today either. That Jesus was a refugee, that sort of thing. I do want to point out that JD Vance. So we're going to get into the politics of it now and where the dangers could be if we apply Ordo Amoris to politics, because I do think there are some dangers there. But so when he's saying that, oh, Jesus is a refugee, all that sort of language, all that sort of stuff, you start to conflate the idea that, oh, there should just be open borders, open walls everywhere. Okay, if you want to make that argument, that's fine. But I find it interesting that the Pope's not making that argument for Vatican City.
Yeah.
He's only making that argument for the United States. And that JD Vance in his conversation didn't say we should treat people poorly or we should remove their dignity or we should be hateful. In fact, he said that doesn't mean we hate people, but it does mean we put America's needs first. And I don't know what's so controversial about that, because what the Pope is going to do in Vatican City is put Vatican City first. That's his job. That's what he's supposed to do, right? And if you're not doing that, you're not being a good leader. What if I were to say to the Pope, you should offer me Holy Communion, the Eucharist, and by doing that, you're denying me entrance into you're not loving me? He would say, no, I am loving you because I'm denying you the Eucharist because you are currently living in mortal sin and you need to repent of that. It's like, well, why'd you put that boundary up? No, that boundary is just up. Like, I'm just enforcing it. So to me, it's like he wants to enforce this idea of, oh, I'm sure. Now he does say, and I'll put a feather in his cap. He does say, hey, no, a nation should be able to expel violent criminals and stuff from their midst. He does say that, but he's like, but people who aren't violent, like, what's the deal? Like, just whatever. That should be loving to let them live there. And JD wasn't saying, oh, we're going to deny refugee status for people, right?
Yeah, no. Again, his point was more. It's just, it doesn't mean that we treat people poorly, and that's another conversation as to how the government should go about maybe deporting people. But I think that the Pope is just really trying to, I think, twist it appears that he's trying to twist just what, the parable and then what the Order of Charity actually means.
Yeah. So, I do think, though, there are dangers to taking the Order of Charity and applying it to a government context. So for instance, to me, the Order of Charity does not take into consideration whether or not someone is legal or illegal when I personally meet them, right? That does not put them inside or outside the order of love that I should give them. Like, if my neighbor is an illegal immigrant, then does that mean I should call ICE right away? Or should I even investigate that? Do I even know that they're an illegal immigrant? Do I need to investigate that? I don't think that. I think that what I do is I treat them with the sort of love and care that a Christian ought to treat another human being, right? So on a personal level, I don't think we can take politics into consideration. But JD Vance is a politician, and he's a politician primarily responsible for people in the United States. And so he does have to take that position. He has to think of what would best love people, not only citizens, but people who are coming here legally. Like, how do I love them best? By just giving people amnesty? Does that really love my citizens and the other people that want to come here legally best? I think he has to consider that.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you that you have to be careful with how the government uses this, because we can easily see how this can be taken way to the far edges where it shouldn't go, of just we only care about America. So in the sense that we will never do any sort of international funding, we won't ever get involved in any other wars or anything like that. I mean, to where it's like we only care about America, so we're gonna be completely closed off, not gonna do anything with any other countries. Like that's wrong. I mean, because I think if we have the ability to, we should go out and help other countries and other people. But when it is detrimental to our own citizens, that's where you have to start to draw the line. Because then you look at other countries that have just not complete open borders, but I mean, you look at the European countries and just they're devastated.
Yeah, there was just and I think today or yesterday in Germany, an Afghan national ran a car into a bunch of people that I don't think was there legally. And of course, that is the sort of person that the Pope would have said, you need to remove them. So I want to give him his due. I don't want to act like I don't want him to I don't want to act like he's advocating for open borders, including criminals, but he is advocating for basically amnesty of people. So before we get into some of the politics stuff, I got some comments that I want to look at from username, which is the fantastic username. So here's the first one. We had a comment about the Good Samaritan. It said, what if by paying for the inn for the stranger, you fail to afford the rent to keep a roof, however you want to say it, over your own children, over your own family? And that's a good question. Now, it seems in the story that the assumption is this Samaritan had the means to be able to do this. But I think that's a good question, and I don't think that that's necessarily. Well, first of all, we're adding a bunch of extra stuff into the story that isn't there for a reason, that sort of thing. But at the same time, I think if you don't have the means, then your responsibilities shift a little bit. He still can stop and dress his wounds. He can still bring him to an inn. And maybe you go, hey, I don't have time to pay for multiple days. You pay for what you can, whatever. Yeah. So being a neighbor doesn't mean you do everything that you wish you could do, but you do everything that you can do, that you have the ability to do, which means you also need to be able to go home because he also needs to stay out of trouble, right? This Samaritan, because he says, hey, he apparently has the means. He's apparently wealthy. And he says, hey, whatever, if he accrues stuff over that, I'll pay for the rest. So now he's got a responsibility to come back and actually pay for the rest. If he doesn't, then that's something completely different. So there's a bunch of different issues as far as that goes. Let's keep moving on here. If you want to add any more questions, please add them below. We'll go another 10 minutes here, and then we'll answer any more. And if there's not any, we'll just head out. But so you brought in, we both brought in the fact that I think there is absolutely a consequences to applying the Ordo Amoris blindly to political things, because you can warp it and shape it. So one way that you mentioned, I think just now, was you could be like ultra nationalist at the expense of other people, right? Yeah. And the other way is you could start to extend it to say, well, then I should be able to usher in some sort of socialist utopia by taking from the rich and giving to the poor, and implementing those sorts of programs. Because I need to take care of the United States first. So there's obviously some tensions there, which leads me to my favorite person in the world. Not really, I'm just kidding. But Phil Vischer. This is ancillarily, I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm going to say it. This is ancillarily connected to what we're talking about here. So So he is actually going to talk about the fact that we should be for certain policies as Christians, because if we're not, then are we really loving people? Are we really caring for people? This is actually directly in correlation with like the defunding of the USAID, which we could get into at a different time. But this is interesting. This is the order of love that does seem to get warped when we start to try to apply it to political things. So I can't remember what all he says here, but it's a multiple people, not just him. But here we go.
I've heard from very many people who complain about me wanting to help refugees that we need to help the people that live here before we help the people that live there. And I just have to point out, there's a huge overlap of the Venn diagram of the people who say we need to help the people here first, who, when you propose legislation to help the people here, vote against it. We do not want to help people. So it is not just we want to help the people here. It is really people should help themselves, and I don't want anything to do with it.
It's just easier to cut off the help to the people who can't vote.
Well, you need a reason.
It appears principled.
It appears principled.
Right.
We should help the people here. Okay, well then how about if we do an experiment with guaranteed basic income? Heck no, I'm voting no. How about if we try to get people more access to health care so that more women feel comfortable carrying their pregnancies to term and we have better maternal health outcomes? Heck no, they're poor people. They need to take care of themselves.
Okay. So this is... It's funny because this actually plays right into what we were talking about, right? So he's like, well, you don't really want to care for the people here because you won't vote for universal basic income. Oops, sorry. Take him. Bye, Phil. Which is like where do you even go with that? Because you're like, well, no, but universal basic income has all these other unintended consequences that can hurt the people here. Right.
And just, I know. Every time you said, we want to pass legislation to help people, it's like, well, what is it? How does that legislation help people? You can't just say that you're for passing legislation that helps people. Like, show me how that actually helps people. Yeah. Because in the long term, especially with the universal basic income, it does not seem to help.
Yes. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Economically speaking, it doesn't. Politically speaking, universal. And we basically have universal basic income, by the way. We basically do because we've got Medicare, Medicaid. We've got those things. We basically do. But here's the thing about what Phil is saying here is like, you throw that legislation on the table. It's not that they don't want to care for people here. That might be somebody might say, well, we don't want to take care of people here. They might say that. And then they would be wrong. But there are plenty of people who want to take care of people here that say, oh, actually, universal basic income is not a net positive for people. And that is not the way to take care of the people that we need to take care of. That's a legitimate reason. But you can definitely see that there is a disconnect here with what he's talking about, that he thinks that these social programs are the only ways that we can help people here. Whereas a conservative person might say, well, no, what I want is deregulation so that we can have higher wages, and then people, as they work for it, they can actually take care of themselves better, and it gives them dignity and hope and purpose because they're able to find the jobs that they need to find. And I'm not necessarily against a social safety net, but let's not make the social safety net so broad that it disincentivizes that sort of upward mobility. So I've talked a lot. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that you also got to consider it's like how much of it is the government's job to care for like with universal basic income, like how much is the government supposed to do? The government, supposed to protect us. And, I think some social safety net is okay, but it gets to like you said, how broad is that supposed to be? What is the point of what is the job of the government? And so, cause I think, is it loving to then take more taxes from the rest of the population to then have an even larger basic income, Medicaid, all that sort of welfare system? So I think that has to be taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of say, well, people just don't want to take care of people flippantly like that is to me, disingenuous and
Yeah.
irresponsible. But it does say it does pull into focus the point that we're trying to make here, that you can apply this orders of love both on the left and on the right in ways that are not ethical, that are not principled and helpful. So in this 1 minute clip, JD's saying, hey, we need to take care of the people that are here first. We need to care for them first, and then once their needs are covered, then we can start to expand that sort of thing. And I think that seems to be clear. Like, if I only have enough food for my family, and then somebody else says, hey, I'm hungry, can you give me food? And I go, well, you know what? My son doesn't need to eat today. I can give it to you. We can figure out my son tomorrow. That's me being a bad parent. But I have what I can give, right? I give what I can, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I do think that it seems JD left some things out, like loving God first and foremost, and then that will help us order our loves appropriately, right? And also then applied it to a national context where I'm not sure it works like that.
Yeah, that's where of course, we got to get careful about applying what individual Christians are supposed to do to government. That's different, I mean, because that again gets into what's the government's job? Is it the government's job to care for my family, or is that my job to care for my family? Sort of a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I got there we go. I was getting like blown up on my phone. I'm like, stop it. Yeah, so I wasn't ignoring you. I was trying to not ignore you because my phone was going off like crazy. Yeah, so I think we've kind of beat that horse to death a little bit, or the dead horse. We beat. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. So long story short, we think that the Pope incorrectly applies the Good Samaritan in refuting JD Vance. The Pope also seems to be interested in saying that JD Vance isn't being biblical with how he is seeking to order his policies. And so we've sided with JD Vance on that. But then JD Vance also misses a few things that would have added context to maybe help us understand that he's talking personally as principled, and then saying we can apply kind of a similar concept to our national policy. Is that a good summarization?
Yeah, I think it's a good summary. The Pope was wrong, but JD Vance wasn't perfect.
Yeah. There you go. That's even better than I did. There you go. The Pope is wrong, but JD Vance isn't perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So, and I do want to say, like, immigration issues are difficult issues. I get it. And deporting people, that's a hard thing, right? And it can get into our feelings. I get that. But I actually think, as the president and as somebody who has to make these tough decisions, you actually do need to make decisions that are going to be difficult emotionally for the health of your country in almost every circumstance. And that's going to happen with immigration. I think I said Tom Homan, it's kind of the Borders Czar guy, was like, hey, the Pope, he should worry about leading the church and let us worry about leading the country. and I'm like, yeah, I tend to agree. Now, again, JD Vance said this is a Christian concept. So I think that was when the Pope felt obliged to respond, because JD Vance said that. But I don't think JD Vance is out of line saying, hey, a country is first and foremost supposed to make sure it can take care of its citizens, and then it can figure out the other things as far as the rest of the world and refugees and that sort of thing. And I don't think that's out of bounds.
Yeah. And again, it's like, that's not to say that Trump and Vance should not take as much care as possible to treat the illegal immigrants well when they are deporting them. They should be treating them well. They should be treated with dignity as human beings.
Especially the ones that haven't committed like heinous violent crimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So they should be doing that, but they should still be also deporting illegal immigrants who break our laws. But
Yeah. Well, and to say it's not you're not a criminal if you come into the country illegally, and to say, well, it's like rolling through a stop sign. It's like, no, that is not the same thing. Like, it's not the same thing as rolling through a stop sign. That's like a civil matter. It's not even a misdemeanor to roll through a stop sign or to speed. It's just a citation, right?
Yeah.
Entering the country illegal is either a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on how you do it. So it is a crime. You are a criminal when you do it. So when you say, well, illegal immigrants haven't committed crimes. No, by definition, they've committed a crime, right? And they might be the nicest people in the world otherwise. I get that. But by definition, you've committed a crime. And when you've committed a crime, by definition, you ought to be held responsible for that. And it is within a country's purview to spend however much money they would desire to make you pay for that. I tend to think there won't be as big of deportations as many say, partly because of the cost it's going to take. But it's a winning issue. It's like an 80-20 issue. So they're going to do it as long as they can. And I think that they're fully within their rights to do that. And I don't think it's immoral to do that.
No. Yeah.
All right. I have a comment from my friend Steve Meckley. Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us today. Steve's got a family, so he should just answer this by himself. I'm just kidding. He says, if we're supposed to care for our own family first and then for those around us, what level of care does our family need before we offer generosity to others? Is it before we pay our Netflix or after? I actually think, Steve, that this is kind of a false dichotomy here. I think it can be during. You don't have to use your Netflix money to care for other people, but if you are paying for Netflix and that is what is causing you not to give to your local church or to a food bank or to help somebody that's down on their luck in your local church, I do think there's an order you look at, though. First, you take care of your needs of your family and the things going on with your family first. Then you look to the people who are closest to you. That might be extended family. That might be your next door neighbor. It might be your friends. It might be people that are, I think Galatians is pretty obvious that it's also people within your church, within the community of believers that you look to next. And then what you have next is, if you have excess beyond that, then you look towards people that are on the outside of those sort of circles. And I don't, and that's not just me saying it. I mean, the Apostle Paul was very clear that you have to take care of your family first. Now, whether or not you pay for Netflix, that is a personal decision. Maybe you don't, maybe you do. But if it is causing you not to care for people in general, if it's causing you not to care for people, then I think, then you need to eliminate that, because it's standing in the way of you sharing the love of God and the neighborliness to other people. I don't know. Do you have anything to say to that, Thomas? Or
yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you just said. Just say there's you have to take care of your family's needs first, and then, like, for me, if that means you don't, maybe I don't get Starbucks drinks every single day this week, so I can go help, Don down at the church who lost his job, then that's what it takes, and that'd be doing the proper thing to properly love your neighbor in that instance.
Yeah,
because if you're going to take away from your kids' food or your kids' needs to then go help Don, that would be wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's the thing that is keeping you from actually caring for other people, and I don't think that like having a car, because you could use this with anything. You could be like, well, I guess then we should just live at our very basic means and never have anything in excess, like, at all. Never pay for ice cream, because that could be $3 you could give to someone else. I do think it's a matter of conscience in those situations. Where you go, you know what, today instead of this, we're going to go do this because we need to show love to other people. So I think there are matters of conscience within that. So I don't want to get like into the pedantics and the semantics of, well, if I look at my budget, do I need to completely eliminate now, if I'm paying for Netflix and I can't pay for the food for my family, for my whatever, then eliminate Netflix, right? Like if that's causing me not to be able to care for my kids, obviously. So it's the same thing. Like there's a matter of principle. There are things that you can pay for that you don't have to pay for, but you do pay for. And then as God works on your heart and in your mind and your conscience, you might let go of some of those things so you can do some other things as well. So I don't think I'm going to go line item by line item. Like Steve says here, by definition, every time we spend money on something, it's causing us to not spend it on something else. So by definition, paying for Netflix causes us to not care for others with that money. I completely deny that dichotomy. Like I get what you're saying, because like budget is not like the money you spent is finite. Your money you spend is finite. But I think you can take that reasoning to the level that is completely unhealthy, where you go, well, now I'm gonna make money and I'm going to live completely below my means and never do anything that is for comfort, or like right now what I'm doing, I've got a nice camera, I've got lights, stuff that Free Thinking Ministries is doing this to hopefully share gospel truth and the ability to reason to the world. But we did spend money on this, so maybe we shouldn't have spent money on this, and we should have taken that money and we should have given it somewhere else. Maybe when I pay for gas in my car, I should actually pay for gas in another person's car, because by me paying for gas in my car, it means I haven't been able to pay for somebody else. So I think it's just a false dichotomy there. If it is causing you as a matter of principle and conviction not to give to other people, I think that's when we revisit it. It's not, because then otherwise you got to go line item by line item and you have to eliminate every single thing. And then I don't think this is actually going to what JD Vance or we were saying. You take care of the needs of your family first, then you look to other people, then you look to other people. And we should always be revisiting that, right? Like we shouldn't always be assuming that we're in the right. We should be being like, okay, are we being selfish? That, and the other thing. But it doesn't mean we have to eliminate all of the things that we own in order to exhibit love for others. I don't know. I've talked a lot. What do you think?
This is definitely a case-by-case issue. You know, this is, every Christian needs to have discernment in this area. Because like you said, you can go to the extreme where then, I mean, you know, rice and beans every day, so I can then give to someone else. The point of us talking about this is not a letter of the law situation. This is meant as a general guideline of how we interact with others.
Yeah, principles.
Yeah, it's, you know, because not every situation is going to be black and white. Some of them are going to be different. Because maybe it would be more loving for, if there's a situation where you only have enough food for your family, to then, oh, I'll give my share of food to someone else, though.
Yeah.
Like there's it just changes with the circumstances. This can't be a black and white issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why it's like we said, it's dangerous to apply it to governmental policy as a black and white issue. But as a principle, again, principles are not laws. Principles are not rules. They're principles. Generally speaking, this is how we ought to order our lives, right? Generally speaking, this is how we ought to order our lives. And so that's what JD Vance is getting. Generally speaking, in the United States, this is how we ought to order our policy. And I think that's fine. I think that's fine. All right. I think that's about enough for us today. We have covered the gambit. I hope you have found this helpful. Thomas, any last words? Wow, that sounded really ominous right there.
No, just
all right.
We really beat this dead horse to death.
Yes, absolutely. We could have had a 5-minute stream. JD Vance kind of right. Pope wrong. All right. Goodbye, everyone. Okay. Well, join us next time. Next week, Tim will be back. We might talk about Gaza, because him and I have some different ideas on that. So maybe some fireworks will fly. I don't know. We'll see you next week on Thursday at 3 p.m. And until then, as we always say here at Free Thinking Ministries, stay reasonable. Come on. All right. One more time. Stay reasonable.